Depression is very common. I think y'all all know that. I would be surprised if you didn't have family members or friends who have suffered with depression at some point in time. It is one of the very most major diseases that we see. There are several different depressive disorders. So everything, when you say depression, that's probably not descriptive enough. You hear, oh, they have depression. Well, it's like, what kind of depression are you talking about? So there are different categorizations of it, and it does have a DSM-5 classification. We're going to look at 3 different ones that they actually recognize right now. Major depressive disorder, which is what people are usually thinking of when they say you have depression. Persistent depressive disorder, which is also an interesting one that you need to note and be able to sort out. Have that one. And then finally, premenstrual depressive disorder is a DSM-5 category. So there actually is a hormonally linked, probably, disorder that we can identify. Okay, the 2 words that are in bold print and underlined are probably the most important thing to remember. Depression is often underdiagnosed and it is undertreated. And that's, I could not emphasize that enough, how often it might be underdiagnosed or undertreated. It is a big reason why people come to medical practices or they seek help. They may not be seeking help because they're depressed, but they're seeking help because they don't feel right. And when a person's depressed, it magnifies other complaints they might have. And that might be the reason they actually come in to be seen. So let's look at it. It is the 4th most prevalent health problem in the world. Is that not shocking? I mean, think about it. There's a lot of things that go in the world from heart disease on down, but major depressive disorder is the 4th most prevalent disease. Very common. It costs the United States a lot of money, okay, 30 to 50 billion, and that's ramped up more as you put the inflation dollars on top of it. Lots of lost productivity, because when people are depressed, they don't work well, they don't think well, they don't show up, their absenteeism is higher, and then they also, when they don't go to work, obviously you lose productivity in your business. I have worked, just give a little bit of a side story, I worked with a person one time, very brilliant person, but this person suffered from major depression, I mean significant. And when this person was at full speed, it was amazing what could be done. You know, this person was a really good worker, very intelligent, very helpful, very energetic. And when major depression would come along, and it would come along, you know, it usually would come along at the least expected time. At those points, this person was unable to function and would be gone for as long as 2, 3, and 4 weeks. I mean, it was that kind of disabling problem for this individual. So when that happened, everybody's loved to kind of pick up the pieces, so it had a huge impact in our work group. And this individual knew that it was very disruptive and always kind of felt guilty about what was happening to us, because it was like 3 or 4 of us working together, and when 1 of 3 or 4 goes away, that's a lot of work for other people to pick up. And we would do that until the disease would kind of relent enough that work could happen again. People who are depressed, this is twice as much work because of the illness, and the health services costs are 50 to 100% greater for people who are depressed, and it's not because they go to psychiatry. The increased costs are related really to a lot of other medical problems, because when a person has depression, it's one of their major problems, it is linked with other disorders. You see it post-MI. You see it in diabetes. In diabetes, it's twice as prevalent. And so when you have a diabetic person, all things being equal, you better be thinking that person has depression or watching for it, because it happens. And so there's so many associations with other medical problems. So once you become depressed, other things don't do as well. And some of the reason for that is when you're depressed, it's hard to be compliant with treatments. It's hard to take care of yourself. So all of that stuff starts to fall away. And the other medical problems crash and burn at the same time that the person mentally is crashing and burning. What is the frequency? In women, the lifetime incidence for major depressive disorder is 20%, and in men it is 12%. So that means 1 in 5 women will have a major depressive disorder episode in their lifetime. That to me is a fairly shocking number. I mean, really. And in men, it's 1 in 10, a little bit more than 1 in 10 will have a major depressive disorder. There's a lot of mortality and morbidity figures tied to depression, and I've bolded the one that's most significant to really pay attention to. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in adolescents. So when you look at teenagers, 15 to 19-year-olds, that's big, and it can be as much as 10 to 30% of those who are 20 to 35 years old. What's the number one cause of death in adolescents?
Suicide?
It's the second. So, suicide is the second leading cause of death in adolescents. Do you know what the first one is? It's okay.
Injury or something?
It's accidental death. Because, teenagers are risk takers, and so car wrecks, other kinds of things that lead to death. So that's number one. Number two is this. Major depression plays a role in probably half to over half of all the suicides. It contributes to higher mortality and morbidity in the context of medical illnesses such as post-MI. It's so significant that really the care providers have to be thinking about it. And successful treatment of major depressive disorder improves outcomes for everything else that may be going wrong with them. What about demographics? Who actually ends up with depression? Okay, non-Hispanic blacks are 40% less likely than non-Hispanic whites to have major depressive disorder during their lifetimes. So there's clearly an ethnic predilection one way or the other, and probably a genetic component that is tied to the ethnic background. So it's neither here nor there, but it's interesting to observe because it's notable, maybe notable in your population. Sex, women are 70% more likely than men to have major depressive disorder during their lifetime, and we've seen that by overall incidence. And then the age of onset, average age 32 years, incidence increases with advancing age, and the rates of men and women are highest in those aged 25 and 44. And my friend, it started happening in the late 20s, and it's a part of this person's life to this day. The big box here. Left untreated, depression can destroy a person's social, physical, and mental well-being and place an enormous burden on society in all kinds of ways that are unbeknownst. So just to get a feel for an area, how many people in this room actually have immediate connection with someone who suffers from major depression? Okay, look, the statistics are borne out. So either a friend, a family member, a parent, a sibling, and from your experiences with that person how much that can be a problem. It really is a problem in relationships as much as anything. So how does it happen? This is a good question. How does it happen? I will tell you, most of the psychiatric disorders will talk to you about things that might be going on, but I would say that in general, as a group of disorders, we really don't know what's causing them. And I think depression is like a lot of other diseases we see. Diabetes will be notable when you get there, but you've had some other diseases leading up to this. The final expression might look the same in a person, so depression has its characteristics, but the pathways mechanistically inside the body that bring you up to that point of being depressed probably vary between people. So that it's really not the same disease in all people. The expression is fairly similar in people, but the reason why a person has depression can vary from person to person. And that is true. So it's a heterogeneous disorder, okay? There's probably no single cause. There's definitely things going on in the brain, and we're going to look at what those things might be, but it's probably a mix of diseases that show up as depressed mood. Just like diabetes is a mix of diseases that show up as high blood sugar, okay? Not the same thing happening all the time. Okay, research is ongoing, and they're trying to figure out if there's a marker or a lab test you can pull in somebody that will show that they're more predisposed to having depression as opposed to somebody else. But we really don't have that diagnostic test that you can run and go, okay, this is probably what it is for you. They're looking at things like neuroimaging. I showed you some pictures yesterday about how the brain is functioning with that SPECT scan, and clearly it's not functioning the same way, but why it's malfunctioning, we're not sure. And then they're also looking at neuroendocrine tests. There's probably a significant relationship between endocrine function, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal gland, and how that functions, and predisposition to having depression. So there's probably a neuroendocrine link for some people. Let's see what we got here. Okay, I put a lot of these neurobiological hypotheses just so you can see how diverse the research is right now. You may live in your lifetime to actually see subgroups of depression identified and figured out. Maybe I will. I'll be optimistic. I'm 60. I might be here until 120. I'm only halfway there. I don't really know. But here's some things just of interest. Genetic vulnerability, there's solid evidence from twins that 30 to 40% of major depressive disorder risk is genetic, but there's no specific risk gene or gene-environment interaction that's been reliably identified. So even though we know that it runs in identical twins, if that kind of leans you in that direction, we still don't know what the gene is or what genes are off, so they can't really do that research yet. Altered HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Y'all get more of that when you get to the endocrine module, but it's there. The only problem is they really haven't found any drugs yet that target the HPA axis that actually reliably make depression go away. So they're still working on it. Deficiency of monoamines. This is one that is the basis for a lot of our drug therapy right now. Every drug that you can use to treat depression does something to monoamines, the neurotransmitters in your brain, in your body. So we think it's most likely related to a deficiency. Now, how a person ends up deficient, we don't know. But we know that every drug that inhibits monoamine reuptake, so that there's more of it at the receptor, can make people do better. So we know that they're deficient, and we find ways to make the monoamines hang around longer, then they usually will do better. But the researchers believe that monoamine deficiencies is really secondary to something else that's going on. That it shows up as decreased monoamines, and we can treat that to make the monoamines get higher, but why did the monoamines get low in the first place? We're not sure what that is. Some other things, dysfunction of specific brain regions. I showed you those scans. We know that stimulating parts of the brain can make a person do better with depression, but it's not consistent for all people, and the results are not the same. Neurotoxic and neurotropic processes. Have y'all ever heard the word kindling for those who had...
like fires?
Yeah, like fires. Like they talk about kindling in... maybe you had that in abnormal psych for those who did. Does that term sound familiar to anybody? Kindling? Well, here's, just for fun, I'm not going to ask you to remember this, but kindling is the notion that when some derangement happens in the body, like in the brain, and the neurotransmitters aren't functioning quite right, that when you finally reach that place and you have a disease show up, that the part of the brain that was dysfunctional actually facilitates further dysfunction. So it's like you start a little fire in one cell, and then when you have the disease show up, it causes further dysfunction surrounding cells. So it's like it gets worse and worse as time goes by. And there are people that respond well to treatment to begin with that finally don't respond well to treatment, and they think it's because the area that's affected has actually gotten larger and spread, that the disease causes its own kindling, and you end up losing brain volume and brain functionality over time. Another thing, reduced GABAergic activity. Y'all remember GABA from the neuro module? What is GABA? Just somebody.
Inhibitor.
It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So they believe there's something wrong with that, that their inhibition is reduced. Okay? But they can't find any targets of GABA that actually have led to an antidepressant effect. But they're looking. Okay, so it's probably tied into it. Did y'all talk about glutamates in the brain? Yes, what about the glutamates? And what do the glutamates do? Do y'all remember how they're tied together? Say it. What's the connection between glutamate and GABA?
Glutamate is excitatory.
Say that again.
Glutamate is excitatory.
Yes.
Is what we know, but
Okay.
Doesn't glutamate change to GABA?
Yes. Glutamate is one of the molecules that are kind of precursors on the way to GABA, so they may be tied together somewhere. If the glutamate system is blown up, then the GABA system might be dysfunctional in some way. But again, I can sit here and tell you what I think it is, but really they don't know. But that's an area that they're exploring. And then the final thing is impaired circadian rhythms. We know that when you manipulate circadian rhythms like sleep, you can have an antidepressant effect, but we still don't really understand how the whole thing works. So you see they've got a lot of different little things in here. Genetics, HPA axis, deficient monoamines, dysfunction of brain regions, neurotropic processes, the kindling phenomenon, GABA problems, glutamate problems, impaired circadian rhythms. All this is being worked on, but we still are not there. So what ties everything together is a couple of theories, and if you understand these theories, at least you'll be able to understand the drug therapy, because we'll kind of make some sense within that context. So the bioamine hypothesis is the hypothesis that indicates that deficiency of monoamines, and particularly norepi and serotonin, are believed to be the two neurotransmitters that control mood and behavior. So emotion, mood, and behavior are tied into those two different monoamines. If you block the degradation of those transmitters and you have higher levels of them, then their concentration goes up and they can interact with receptors better and they can regulate mood and behavior better. So they believe a deficiency of those two are tied into mood and emotional regulation, and when those are facilitated or enhanced in some way, then mood and behavior can improve. The permissive hypothesis takes it a little bit further, kind of actually tells you how they're related. The permissive theory says that emotional behavior is a balance between norepinephrine and serotonin in the brain. And the key regulator is serotonin. That's really the monoamine that's most important to regulating brain levels of norepinephrine. So serotonin is the linchpin, and norepinephrine is controlled by it to some degree in brain function. So you get down here, if you have low levels of serotonin, they can permit abnormal levels of norepinephrine to cause depression or mania. So let's look. If serotonin cannot control norepinephrine and norepinephrine falls to a very low level, the patient becomes depressed. So if serotonin is not around sufficient to regulate and norepinephrine goes low, then that leads to depression. If the level of serotonin falls and the level of norepinephrine becomes abnormally high, then the patient becomes manic. So what they're saying is that serotonin is a regulator hormone, and that it can regulate for higher and lower levels of norepinephrine. It depends on, in an individual patient, it might be one or the other that it's not doing correctly, so that you end up with either mania or depression, or, as you will see later today, both, when you have a poor regulation and people cycle from highs to lows on a regular basis. According to the hypothesis, antidepressant drugs are effective to treat to the degree that they reinstate the ability of serotonin to control norepinephrine, thus restoring the critical balance that controls emotional behavior. So a lot of your drugs are going to be working on serotonin. Y'all already heard of the SSRS, serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors, because they're working off this permissive theory. So when serotonin is regulated better, then it can regulate norepinephrine better, and then things look okay. But you'll also find that we have drugs that enhance norepinephrine all by themselves, so we're kind of operating with the neurotransmitters on a lot of different fronts. And that will be Dr. Latessi's, she'll go into much more detail on that on Thursday when we actually look at it. So how do we classify these things? MDD, major depressive disorder. Here's what the criteria are for it. The patient has to have at least 5 of the following symptoms during the same 2-week period. So you have to have a 2-week run, and they have to have at least 5 of these symptoms that I'm going to actually bring up here in a second. At least one of those 5 symptoms has to be either a depressed mood or a loss of pleasure or interest. So you can see a depressed person doesn't have to actually have depressed mood. I think we kind of think you have to have depressed mood to be depressed. But the diagnostic criteria are telling you they either have to have a depressed mood or a loss of pleasure or interest. They may have both, but they don't necessarily have to. Okay, here are the possible symptoms that they have to have 5 out of over a 2-week period. I've highlighted depressed mood or diminished interest or pleasure because you know it has to be one of those two has to be in the stack of 5. But here's the rest, and I think you've all seen these at one time or another. We've talked about it. They can have weight loss or weight gain. Some people who've had depression for a long time actually use their weight as a monitor. I'm not eating, I'm not hungry, I'm losing weight, or I'm eating everything in the house and I'm getting overweight. And you can kind of look at that because as their mood shifts, their desire for food can change. So it can be weight loss or weight gain. They can either not be able to sleep at all, or they sleep all the time. So you've heard stories of people who couldn't get out of bed. They stayed in bed all day, every day when they were depressed. Well, that's true. But then you have other people who are depressed all the time and they can't sleep, and they will come to you, do something, I cannot go to sleep. Or I fall asleep at 11 p.m. and I wake up at 1/4 till midnight, and that's it all night. And when people tell me this story, I always get really, it just makes me so tired because I can't even imagine not sleeping more than 30 minutes. And that's just every night they get in bed and there's this dread because you cannot go to sleep, and it's just part of their depression that's going on. They can have psychomotor agitation, like we talked about yesterday, or psychomotor retardation. So a depressed person can actually be moving around all the time, or they can be just slowed down. And I think our bias is that they probably sleep all the time, they're probably gaining weight, they don't get out of bed, and they just barely move. That would be a classic picture. But if that's all you're looking for, you're going to miss a good number of people. They have fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt. Okay, I'd underline that one because you see that a lot. I'm not worth anything. You could not talk that person into a good place, no matter what you did. Or guilty, everything that bad has happened is because of something I did. Diminished ability to think or concentrate, or indecisiveness, cannot make decisions. Or recurrent thoughts of death, suicidal ideation without a specific plan, suicide attempt or specific plan for suicide. So those are the symptom lists that you look at. These symptoms must cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of function. And you will see as we go through all the psych stuff, they always look at symptoms, but they have to be clinically significant distress or impairment always in social functioning, at work, or in other important areas of life. You'll see this terminology over and over again. Because a lot of us have some of those symptoms, but do they distress or impair our ability to get up, go to work, and do our life? Maybe not. They're there, but they're not at the same level of dysfunction. And you'll always see this in all of your DSM-5 categories too. The symptoms are not due to the direct physiologic effects of a substance or another medical condition. So if you have a condition that causes depression, or you have substance use, like alcohol use or a lot of drugs of abuse, create depression as kind of a consequence. Well, that person could not be diagnosed with major depressive disorder. They would be diagnosed with alcohol abuse, and there'd be qualifiers, beyond that diagnosis. The symptoms are not accounted for by bereavement. Okay, somebody dies and there is a grieving process. There is a bereavement period that goes with that. Depression, you cannot call that person depressed. They're grieving, but is it at the level of depression? No. The symptoms are not better explained by other disorders. So you'll see this in DSM-5 too, that they'll always say, view the symptoms, view the duration, can't be from other substances, can't be from other diagnoses, and they aren't explained by other diagnoses that could be made. Okay? So they put it up there, and then there has never been a manic or hypomanic episode. They can never have it. As soon as a person with a major depressive disorder has mania of any sort, hypo or full-blown mania, they're immediately in a bipolar diagnosis. Okay? I will talk a little bit more when I get to bipolar about how these two connect, because it's possible to misdiagnose with the way this unfolds. But right now we're going to stick with depression, and then we're going to make the picture muddier by going off into bipolar. Okay, so you see all the symptoms that actually define it. Okay, let's look at depression from a patient's perspective. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So let's see how this plays in here.
The year of 2010, I will never forget. I was hit hard with depression. It's like it was just there, just looking at me. Constantly hospitalized, sick mentally and physically, an overwhelming feeling of nothingness just came over me. Sleepless nights, eating habits change. You become distant from everyone and everything. Constant stress, tiredness all the time. Thoughts of just leaving it all behind. Rapidly, I lost weight. I was passing out from exhaustion almost every day, taken away in ambulances, hospitalised, to try and determine the main cause of what is going on with me. Family nor friends could understand. I had no one to go to. Fighting it is the hardest part. You cannot begin to explain what it's like to see your mother crying, that strong person in your life just breaking down, and seeing your best friend in tears. It's just hard to deal with. I had so much that I wanted to achieve in life, but I just had no motivation left. I started to do a lot of bad things, hang around with a lot of bad people, make a lot of bad choices. I just wasn't me. I was the sensitive kid. I wasn't as tough as the other people around. It was very easy for me to break down. No one could understand the pain that I was going through. So I thought, what's the point? I'm not getting anywhere in life. I needed change in my life. A new start. I needed to find myself. So what I eventually did was I got help, and calling Beyond Blue was the best thing that I could have ever done, because if it wasn't for them, then I'd still be left in the dark.
You are not alone. We believe in you.
You'll never know how easy it is to go and tell your loved ones, go and tell your friends, and you'll be surprised just how much they will love you and care for you and support you through this. But it's important that you believe in yourself, okay, and not to let anyone else drag you down, okay, because you are good enough. You gotta get up and you gotta keep going, okay, and don't let anything else drag you down.
Okay, well that kind of speaks into what he's talking about. One thing I think is interesting that he said that I don't want you to fail to appreciate, when a person has a psychiatric diagnosis and a mental issue, they can end up in trouble. So there can be legal issues, there can be other things you don't do, like lose your job. That to me is all kind of very unfortunate, because if they're not treated well and it's not picked up, it has consequences in the rest of life that can actually really impact, how that person's viewed for the rest of their time. So getting help and getting better is a good goal for that person before they make a bad choice or get in the wrong direction. Okay. let's distinguish grief from major depressive episode. This is very important to me because you're going to get a lot of people with grief and you don't want to call them depressed and treat them with antidepressants when it's not depression. And in practice, this will come up. If you live long enough and you're with somebody else, death enters into the picture sooner or later, and then there will be all kinds of responses. DSM-5 does a really good job of distinguishing grief from a major depressive episode in a lot of the areas of functioning that we look at, when you do the psychiatric assessment. So first one is affect. In grief, the predominant affect is feelings of emptiness and loss. Okay, that's grief. In major depression episode, it's persistent depressed mood and the inability to anticipate happiness or pleasure. So this one, empty and loss. The other is depressed mood and no ability to find pleasure or happiness. Dysphoria. Grief is likely increases in intensity. It will likely decreases in intensity over days, but there will be days where you're more affected than others. So it's described as like waves of grief, pains of grief that come along. But over time it dissipates. Okay, there tend to be thoughts or reminders of the deceased. The pain of grief may be accompanied by positive emotions and humor that are uncharacteristic of pervasive unhappiness and misery that are the major depressed episodes. If you've lost a loved one and you've been around people, it goes back and forth from talking about being so sad and you don't know what this is going to do and all kinds of issues. And then you swing back over towards laughing about the things you did with that person and remembering them. So it goes back and forth. I know my dog is not a person, but a lot of you people really like dogs, and I know that. And I have the same thing about the dog. I think about, things that are fun and things I like to do. And we'll talk about, oh, this dog, she always did that, she'd be doing this. And then I'll be sad that she's not there. And it takes a while before you actually move to healing, and it's kind of what it is. Okay. Thought content. This is an important distinction between the two. Thought content of a person with grief is usually preoccupation with thoughts and memories of the deceased. A person with major depressive episode is usually self-critical or pessimistic. It's focused on self. So when you're depressed, I'm worthless, I'm no good. It's all inside and down and no good. And when you're in grief, you're thinking about somebody else. So that's a distinction. The self-worth issue is also an important distinction. Grief, they have self-esteem. They just lost somebody. They have lost. A person with depression, feelings of worthlessness and self-loathing. I could not emphasize how much that you cannot get that person to think they're okay. They just are not okay. In their mind, they are not okay. Self-derogatory ideation. It's not, if it's present in grief, it's because you didn't do something for the deceased. You visited enough, you didn't say I love you, there's things you did not do. Okay? So that's what the self-derogatory ideation is in grief. In depression, you're just self-derogatory, period. It's not about what you didn't do. It's just about you. Thoughts about death. If a person who's bereaving or in grief, they're usually thinking, if they think about death and dying, it's because they want to join the other person. You hear that, we'll meet again in heaven. People say, I'll be glad when I'm dead so I can see this person again. It will scare everybody around them because you're not going to do anything. It's like, no, but I'll be glad when I can rejoin. And sometimes that grief and that desire for reunification is so strong that you'll be with somebody when they're near their death and they will talk about the person that they were looking for, for the past 10 years. At least I'll see my wife again. At least I'll see my child again. And so it always kind of stays there, that reunification piece. In major depressive episodes, the thoughts are focused on ending one's life because of being worthless, undeserving of being alive, unable to cope with pain of depression. So you want to kill yourself when you're depressed because you're not worth anything, you can't go anywhere, you don't deserve to be alive, and you want to escape. The lady who will talk to us about suicide, Karen Orsi, she'll talk about how folks feel at the end. A lot of times it is an escape. I can't be in this world anymore like this. I just need to get out of it. There are some atypical presentations for depression, and I want you to really pay attention to these because they are important. They may not present with a low mood or other typical symptoms like I told you. They might just come in irritable or other ways. Some are somatic complaints. They have fatigue, headache, abdominal pain, and weight gain. They can drive you crazy running lab tests. I'm going to get an X-ray, I'm going to do this, because there's just all these complaints. But they're somatic in nature, and you have to kind of, when you get a constellation of things, you have to kind of stand back and start thinking, what else ties all of these things together in the person, as opposed to, I'm going to run a test, we check your chemistry and your CBC, and I'm going to do a CT scan, and we're going to get all into all the parts of the body. May not be needed. The patient also may complain more of irritability or anger, and this is seen more often in children and adolescents. So when children and younger people have depression earlier on, their presentation might not be low energy, depressed mood. They might just be irritable, snappy, and disagreeable. Now you have to sort that out from just ordinary growing up as a teenager and breaking away from parents, but that's our life. That's what we have to all figure out sooner or later when you have children. Okay, so what is the development and course of depression? The onset may occur at any age, but more markedly after puberty. The peak incidence is in the 20s. That's when it first shows up. The course of depression is variable. Some rarely go into remission. They're depressed or kind of depressed all the time, and you never really get them out of it. And then some people go from depression to remission, and they do well for long stretches. All of a sudden, depression comes back after 10 years. Okay, so it can be quite variable. Chronicity of symptoms. Okay, that is how often and how long are symptoms present. Okay, if you have chronicity of symptoms, it increases the likelihood of underlying personality disorders, anxiety, and substance use disorders. So if symptoms are present all the time, other things may be unleashed that are not desirable. If the symptoms, the chronicity of symptoms decreases, if you don't have chronicity of symptoms decreases the likelihood that the treatment will be followed by full symptom resolution. So just the point about chronicity of symptoms, it increases potential for other complications that go along with depression, like anxiety, and it decreases your chance that you'll resolve. The longer people have depressed symptoms, the harder it is for that person to respond to treatment. And if somebody sits down and said, I've had depression for 15 years and nobody can take care of me and I'm still depressed today, don't act like, oh, we're going to figure this out. I mean, you'll want to, and that's what you'll try to do, but you just need to know in the back of your brain that you may not be able to figure it out. Okay, it may be managing to the best degree with a person who's depressed. Recovery typically begins 3 months, within 3 months for 2 and 5 individuals, major depressive disorder, and within 1 year for 4 and 5. So the recovery starts fairly soon in some, but it may be really long in other people. That's the hard part about depression, is it doesn't show up the same way at the same time, it look the same, and it can last long periods of time. It really is quite variable. Recency of onset is a strong determinant of the likelihood of near-term recovery. The sooner somebody brings you in depressed symptoms at the very beginning of what they've had, you have a better chance of getting them out. If they come in to be seen because they're depressed, they've been this way, oh, how long have you been this way? Oh, 6 months to a year. That's a harder symptom that's a harder story to think you're going to get them pulled out of it. Now, there are some features associated with low recovery rate. Okay, long duration of current episode, makes sense. If they have psychotic features, there are people who are depressed who can have hallucinations, delusions. If they have prominent anxiety, less likely to recover well. Personality disorders, less likely to recover well. And symptom severity, less likely to recover well. Okay. The risk of recurrence becomes progressively lower over time as the duration of remission increases. It's kind of like a done statement, but I think it has to be said. If you have done well and you have not had disease for several years in a row, your chance of having it happen again begins to be reduced because you have somehow found a way to stabilize your bioamines, etc. If not, if things cycle around fairly often, then maybe harder to expect that you're not going to have a recurrence. Risk of recurrence is higher, those with a preceding severe episode. It's higher in younger individuals. It's higher in those who have experienced multiple episodes, and it's higher in those with even mild symptoms during remission. Okay, there's no difference between the sexes in symptomatology, course of treatment, and there are no clear effects of age on course of treatment response. So when you have a depressed person, you just have to work them as a depressed person. All their presentation and history tells you is likelihoods of great response or not. And we talked about these, but just to kind of put a few more in there. Some symptom differences exist. Like we said, the somatic complaints, hypersomnia and hyperphagia, are more common in younger patients, as well as anger and irritability. That's kind of the somatic symptoms and the mood disorder that you see. In older persons, there are more melancholic symptoms and psychomotor disturbances, and usually the psychomotor disturbances are retardation. So that older person may look more like that. Suicide attempts lessen in middle and late life. If you were going to kill yourself, you did it when you were an adolescent or in your early 20s. And if you have not chosen to do that with depression, as you move further in life, then the likelihood goes down, but it's not zero. Okay? The course of disease does not generally change with aging. Okay. So that's major depressive disorder. I know we're kind of, our whole schedule kind of out of sync. Y'all want to take 10 minutes just to kind of run and just move around a little bit, and then let's pick this up again? Okay. That will work.